convinced people we've got the right ideas for this country. I think we've got off to a great start.
And is the pressure making the man in the driving seat feel just a bit queasy?
I don't feel much pressure this week. I'm off the fags, you'll be pleased to hear. But the pressure, I don't feel... it's obviously an important week for me. I need to make sure the party is doing all the things to set out its clear alternative. I must make a good speech on Wednesday. But I relish the challenge.
Well, Andy, he's given up the fags, I'm pleased to hear. But do you think he's really ready for an election fight?
Well, he certainly said he was, he certainly seemed to be, but I think just as significant today was the fact that we're hearing what sounds like an election platform from the Conservatives, and it's an election platform based around tax cutting. When George Osborne stood in this hall behind me and said under a Conservative government only millionaires would pay death duties, that went down extremely well. They're hoping that's going to go down even better out in the country. Put that together with the promise that first-time buyers will only pay stamp duty on properties up to a value of £250,000. This really does look like a pitch for cutting taxes for middle-income Middle Britain. And quite frankly, after all that the party has heard from David Cameron about green issues, this is exactly the kind of message that this week they want to hear at this conference.
Thanks, Andy. People with £35,000 in the bank will have all their money protected from today. After Northern Rock's cash crisis, the government wants to reassure savers, so they'll get their cash back if their bank collapses. The Chancellor, Alistair Darling, says the banks should pay for the scheme themselves. Her usual parting shot is a scowl accompanied by a famously dismissive catchphrase. But Anne Robinson's been far more generous than that to her husband. The host of The Weakest Link has reportedly agreed to give him half of her fortune in their divorce settlement, a cool £30 million. 5's Faye Barker reports.
After 27 years of marriage, the link between Anne Robinson and husband John Penrose has broken.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
The TV presenter has amassed a whopping £60 million fortune, mainly through her successful quiz show and its popularity both here and in the US. It's thought that the couple began to drift apart in recent years, with Anne Robinson preferring to spend her time at her home here in West London or in New York. Her husband, John Penrose, meanwhile, preferred to spend his time in the Cotswolds. It seems they were effectively leading separate lives. But with a reported £30 million settlement, husband John won't be losing out.
There have been some dramatic changes in the law of divorce in the last 6-7 years, and we have this sort of starting point, a principle of equality of sharing, and there's got to be a very good reason to depart from equality, particularly as in this case you've got a 27-year marriage.
Big female stars like Britney Spears and Halle Berry have avoided costly splits due to prenuptial agreements, something Anne Robinson didn't have.
I think there are some critics of Anne Robinson who think that she's very much like her on-camera persona, who think this is some kind of justice, that she may end up, in fact, alone in her old age. However, I think that those who have worked with and who know Anne have always found her to be very professional and are feeling rather sorry for her today.
The pair are divorcing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, but say they will always remain on good terms. Clearly it pays to stay friends with one of TV's toughest women. Faye Barker, 5 News.
Coming up next on 5 News, why buying a green home could boost your bank balance. Plus,
I'm in Scotland hunting Nessie, but it seems the famous monster is keeping a lower profile than ever before.
This is 5 News, welcome back. They're heralded as the future of green housing, and from today, buying a so-called zero-carbon home will be better for your wallet as well as the environment. New houses that get the greenest rating will be exempt from stamp duty. Catherine Jacobs at a new zero-carbon development in Surrey. Catherine, is it easier to be zero carbon than it is to say it?
Well, absolutely. Here at BedZ, John, which stands for Beddington's Zero Energy Development, they're certainly trying to be carbon neutral, which means all 100 houses here are trying to generate as much electricity as they consume without using fossil fuels. But I'm afraid to say that whether you live in a new house like this one or an old property, living the carbon neutral dream is far from easy.
There are 23 million properties in the UK, with 3 million more planned for 2020, and the government says it wants to turn them all green. From today, it's offering to get rid of stamp duty on houses worth up to £500,000 if they're carbon neutral. But here's the snag. The tax break only applies to new carbon neutral houses, and unless you come to an eco-park like this one, they're few and far between. All the properties here are built according to the government's brand new code for sustainable homes.
Well, this house gets 6 stars under the government's code, the very highest level. So from construction to the end of its life, it's designed to be carbon neutral. If you lived here, you'd definitely be exempt from stamp duty.
It's been extraordinarily difficult to deliver a six-star home. We have other homes on the site here which have delivered 4 and 5 star, but delivering 6 is a real challenge.
But an even bigger challenge will be tackling the emissions from the UK's existing homes, the majority of which will still be in use by 2050.
So this is my house, a Victorian terrace with drafty sash windows and thick walls built back in the days before carbon emissions and global warming became an issue. So what would it take to make it carbon neutral?
Q energy expert Trewin Restrick, who's been assessing my carbon footprint.
For a house this size, we would expect your carbon footprint to be 3.7 tonnes. The really good news is that yours is just 2.7 tonnes, so you're a whole tonne better. But to go carbon zero, you've now got to get rid of that last 2.7 tonnes, and that's where the really hard work starts.
So Trewin, if I'm really serious about going carbon neutral, the only way forward, you say, is generating my own electricity.
That's right, and really where you are, you've got 2 options. You could put a turbine on your roof, but that really won't work here because the wind's too disrupted. So your best option are these solar panels. Put these on your roof, you'll be able to cut your electricity use by about 1/3, even though your roof's not south facing, and it will cost you about £6,500 to £7,500 to put these on your roof. Quite expensive.
So, what's the ultimate verdict?
Even by investing tens of thousands of pounds, I'm afraid for you in this home, it's not going to be possible for you to go carbon zero.
The government's now planning to build 5 new carbon-neutral eco-towns. But if it's to meet its target of cutting the UK's emissions by 60% by 2050, it may be more important to get our older houses in order first.
Now, despite today's stamp duty incentive, the government has yet to come up with a precise definition of what exactly it means to be carbon neutral, which is clearly confusing for the builders who are meant to be building them and, of course, for us, the consumers too. But they're adamant that by 2016, all new homes must be zero carbon. So expect to see estates like this one springing up perhaps on a street near you.
OK, thanks, Catherine. Now for today's Your News. Last Friday we told you about 2 brothers who were taking part in the Great North Run. Ed and John Stott were raising money for the RNLI, who tried to save the life of their brother James. He had suffered an epileptic fit while surfing in Cornwall. Sadly, James died, but Ed and John wanted to say thank you for the lifeguards' efforts. So here's how they got on.
I'm feeling exhausted. I feel fine. Starting off with I was alright. For the first couple of miles I was fine. 2 to 4, it really hurt. 4 to about 9, I was fine. 9 to about 11, it hurt. And then the last 2, giving up walking again. So the highest point was when I realised it was only 13.1 miles, not the 13.5 that Johnny had told me.
Well, Ed and John have managed to raise nearly £5,000 so far, and if you want more details of their cause, or if you just have your own story to share, all the details you need are on our website. Now, depending on who you believe, it's a giant eel, a dinosaur, or even just a figment of the imagination. The Loch Ness Monster has been fascinating tourists and scientists alike for generations, but now the number of sightings has fallen, and there are worries the legend could be losing its lustre. 5's Jonathan Samuels reports.
Loch Ness. And all is calm. Too calm. With only 2 reported sightings of the monster all year, there's worry interest in Nessie is waning. Steve Feltham is desperate to spot the monster. He's been living in this caravan for 16 years without even a whiff of a sighting. He thinks tourists no longer want to believe.
They're being told to be sceptical, and so they're finding mundane explanations for what could be unexplained phenomena that they see.
Maybe the monster's dead, bored, or has quit town, but there are still visitors who try and catch a glimpse.
What do you reckon then? Does it exist?
No, I don't think so.
What do you think?
It could, but we haven't found it yet, and I don't really care.
Here's a man who says he did spot Nessie when he was a teenager.
I was too far away to distinguish shapes. They're just best described as objects, really. But it's nice to think that they might have been humps, you know.
Have you seen Nessie?
No, we haven't seen it, her, him, whatever.
Tourism here generates £6 million a year. Visitors used to be fascinated by the sightings, hoaxes and monster hunters. Adrian Shine has searched below the surface and on top. He says today's tourists want to know about other aspects of the loch.
There's more water in Loch Ness than in the whole of England and Wales put together. You could put every human being on Earth into Loch Ness 3 times over. You could put the telecom tower into Loch Ness and lose it. There's certainly room for some mysteries. It's not Jurassic Park, but there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye.
But there will always be some of us who are prepared to watch, wait, and maybe believe. Jonathan Samuels, 5 News, Loch Ness.
In a moment, Laura's here with the weather. First, a reminder of tonight's main news. The price of petrol has risen to £1 a litre at some garages after fuel duty went up by 2 pence. There are more increases to come. And a jury has heard how Jean-Charles de Menezes was shot dead because of fundamental failures in planning by the Metropolitan Police. And that's the news. I'm back with more news in an hour's time, 7 o'clock. Do join me then. Until then, from me and the team, bye-bye.
QuickFit Insurance, getting you through the weather.
Hello. In keeping with the fact that it's now October, this weather's getting a whole lot more miserable. Right now, wet weather around for the south, some clear skies for the north, but overnight we're seeing ground frost and some fog developing for parts of Scotland and the north of England. By first thing tomorrow morning, that's starting to disappear, but the wet weather for the south isn't. That's carrying on throughout tomorrow. Temperatures down to about 7 degrees in the coolest of places. By midday, those temperatures are going to be picking up. We're seeing a high of around 18, but the wet weather's still carrying on for much of the south, and over the next couple of days, I'm afraid there's a lot more rain on its way. That's it for now. Bye-bye.
Servicing and MOT from QuickFit. Getting you through the weather.
Get daily weather forecasts for your area sent directly to your mobile by signing up for 5's weather service. To sign up, text the word weather, followed by a space, and the first part of your postcode to